Welcome back. We're continuing the coffee table build. Today it's the turn of the drawers. If that sounds good, stick around. Hi and welcome to the Woodgrafter. I'm Andy Gile, and if you're new here, welcome on board. Our mission here is to inspire, educate and support you in your journey to becoming a better woodworker. Now we do that through a whole series of video features. Project videos, really detailed videos on how to build something, such as this series. We also do tool tips, tool techniques, tool reviews, news from the industry, and just get together and have a jolly old chat. So if you're new here and you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. Leave me a thumbs up, get in touch, leave a comment, I'll respond to each and every one. And with that said, let's crack on. So over the last few episodes we've been building the coffee table, and you can see the frame is now complete, top's fitted, everything's looking really good. And today I want to start to look at the drawers. So this is what we're doing, a simple drawer unit. And as you can see, it's got through dovetails at the back and it's got blind dovetails at the front. There's a recess inside at the base here, and that's to take a solid wooden panel. The front of this is made of oak, and the sides and the back of these are made of poplar, and the base panel is also made of poplar. Now I've already gone ahead and milled the first pass of the stock. I've got 4 fronts, I've got 4 backs, and I've got 8 side panels. Now these are still oversized. The fronts are down to their final thickness, which in this case is 20 millimeters. But the sides and the back are still too thick. These are about 16 millimeters, and finally we're going to use 15 millimeters. Now the reason for that is we're going to cut all the dovetails on the Incra system, and if you remember from the Incra series that I did, if you've seen that, if not, might be worth checking out now, you'll know that once you've got your table set up, you've got to thickness the stock to the height of the router bit. So I've left some oversize on this one to allow for that to happen. Now they're also still too long, and they're also still too wide. So the first thing I want to do is to work on the width of the front panels. And once I've got that width sorted out, that will set the width for all the other pieces of stock, the fronts and the backs. Now although we do have the dimensions on the diagram, as always I'm going to take the final dimensions from the project that we're building. So it's this gap here in the drawer fronts that sets the overall width. So I'm just going to come in with my calipers and just take some initial measurements. I'm reading 116.08 millimeters, 116.02 millimeters, and here 116.2. Now obviously 116 is going to give me a tight fit, but I want to just keep that little bit of fat in there so I can bring it down with a hand plane and tune the final fit that we're looking for. Now at the moment all these fronts are around about 158 wide, and we want 116, which is sort of kind of like that. Now if you look at the stock, you can hopefully see this nice grain pattern here. Now what I've done, I've kept these in pairs, so I've kept track of how I've cut this. So this grain pattern is consistent and flows throughout these 2 pieces of wood. So that'll be one drawer front, and that'll be a second drawer front. I also want to keep this grain pattern in the middle, and if we know we're looking for 116, which is about there, I want to rip stock off both sides of it rather than just bring this down to 116 there, which will cut off this grain pattern. So I want to take a little bit of stock off either side. Now at the moment the stock is 158 wide, and I want 116, which is obviously going to be 42. So if I divide 42 by 2, I'm going to come out with 21. So if I take 21 off either side of this wood, that should give me the size I'm looking for, with that nice figured grain being in the centre. So I'm going to set my square up for 21 millimeters, which is there. So we'll set the table saw up to give me that initial cut, and we'll rip all 4 of these down to that width. I'll then set the table saw up to give me the final dimension, and then we'll bring these down to size. Remembering I want to keep them slightly over that 116 so I can tune with a hand plate. So with all those trimmed down to size, that now gives me a reference edge. And I've just put a pencil mark on here just to show me that these are the edges I'm now working from. Now these edges here aren't the finished edge. Obviously that's slightly rough from the table saw, so I just want to come in and clean that up with a hand plane to make sure I've got that perfect pristine edge, and I also want to make sure that this is perfectly square to this face. Now, although the MFT is not ideal for handwork, it's good enough for what we're going to do here. So working on that reference edge, just checking the grain direction, just a couple of clamps in the track at the front to just hold that into position. I'm just coming in now with a number 4 hand plane, a smoothing plane, and this is all set up. So I've sharpened the blade, everything's nice and square, and I'm just now advancing the blade, so I just start to take the lightest of cuts there. I'm just going to smooth that off. Can you hear that skipping? That's the plane just resting across those saw marks. There you go, and once I get that, a smooth cut all the way through, I'm done. No more than that. Now just check yourself to make sure you've not planed out of square. A little bit here. Good. And that's bang on. And once you've done that, we're just going to mark that up so we know that that is a reference edge. So with that done, I can now rip all these down to the final width. And what I'm looking for is a slight resistance fit in this, because that'll allow me to clean up with the hand plane and get that perfect fit that I'm looking for. So I'll go ahead and rip everything down to this width. Don't forget, I'm using my reference edge that we've just made with the hand plane against the fence, and that will bring this into position. Now what you should end up with, if you bring your reference edges to the same side and line that up, is you should have a piece of material that's the right width and the grain matches up. And that should fit snugly into the gap. And no surprises, it does. Now this is obviously a resistance fit, but I can now clean this top edge up with a hand plane and bring it down to the final thickness I'm looking for. But that's looking really, really good. Obviously we need to square the ends up and we need to bring it to length, but you can get the idea of how that's going to come together. Everything's now cut to the right width, and it's a nice tight interference fit in its holes. You can see by this gap this is not yet a machined edge, so I now want to go ahead and just square up this edge. There's a variety of ways that we can do that. The obvious way is to use the Capex. Now what's important here is that we retain as much of this joint, as much of this grain pattern match as we possibly can. So I'm going to square this edge off and make it nice and neat, and the same with this one, and then we'll adjust this end to give me the final fit, and similarly this end to give me the final fit, and that way the grain pattern will seem to flow through. Obviously if I square the end up that doesn't match and then bring this down, obviously you're taking that grain pattern further and further out of alignment, and that's not what we want. So we'll go to the Capex and we'll square this off, and then we'll bring these down to length. This is a pretty simple procedure. We know we've got the good reference edge because we made that before with a hand plane. So the reference edge is going to go against the Capex. I know the end I'm trimming off. It's the end I put a letter on to show the orientation. And I know I want to trim off as little as possible because this is just about giving me that square edge. I'm going to use a clamp because I really want to make sure this does not move during the cut to give me every chance of perfection. Let's get going. Now that's giving me exactly what I'm looking for, a beautiful square edge to my reference face. And now when you bring these together, you can see I have a much better joint here that's square. And although that's obviously altered the grain match slightly, once that's separated by the centre point of our table, the eye will continue that grain sweep through. And that's what I mean by the flow of grain. I can now put those edges we've just cut against the central partition, put that up there, and I can now make a mark on the inside of this piece of stock here, and I know exactly the length I need to cut to. And it's no harder than that mark there. So I'm going to use the reference face again, and I just want to line that up against my lasers to see whether that's looking square or not. It should be, and in fact it is, so I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to cut it ever so slightly long, and then I can slowly nibble up to give me the perfect fit. Again, I've clamped down, everything's firm, let's make this cut. And if we've done our work well, this should now be a nice tight fit all the way through with a slight clearance gap at the end, and that's looking pretty good. Obviously it's still too wide in this direction, but the length is looking pretty good to me. What I want to do is just look at this gap here. You can see this is quite flush against the end, and I've got quite a wide gap at this end. So I'm just going to pop this out again. I'm just going to come in with one of my spare credit cards I tend to use. Push that up against that card. Now just bringing in a second card, I can see that the gap at the top there is pretty good. So I've got an equal gap at that end, and that looks good to me. However, what I don't like is that this gap here at the top is ever so slightly wider than this gap here at the bottom. Now I know this is square, so that is probably a thicknessing problem here. I'm not going to worry about that just yet. When we've got the final drawer built, I'll come back in and I'll allow for that by just planing off an ever slight amount here, so that line visually looks square to the eye. But that's pretty good. So what I want to do is to work on the thickness of this. Now this is a tight joint, and we know that we want credit card thickness top and bottom. So I'm going to come in with a hand plane, and I'm just going to plane this top edge, not the reference edge that we've already made, but the top edge. So I'll start by just taking out those saw marks to give me a nice smooth edge, and check myself for square. Looks good. And then I can just try this in again. Obviously it's a much looser fit now, which is what we want. But I've still not got clearance of 2 credit cards to give me the consistent gap all the way round. So what I'm going to do is take another pass across this piece. Now you can see that's better. I've got the gap I want at the bottom. What you can see, the top is still too tight, so I'll take a couple of more swipes off the top. And there you go. That's what I'm looking for. Nice fit. Nice consistent gap all the way around. We know a little bit work on this bottom corner once the draw's made, but that's looking pretty good. And without the cards in place, that actually slides in and out really quite smoothly. So you can see that's the right size. So with this one done, it's now simply a matter of doing the next one. So I'll go ahead and get the other 3 faces done, and then we'll come back together and see how we use that stock to size the sides and the backs. I'll see you in a minute. So the next job is to take the measurements of these and work out how we size the backs and the sides of the drawers. Let's look at that. So obviously our drawer is going to have a front, it's going to have a back, and it's going to have a couple of sides. So we know that this front piece is now the right size. It fits into our hole perfectly, we've got the right gaps around it, and it slides in and out pretty freely. So I now use this front piece to size these, obviously as these are not cut to size. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll make this back piece the same length as the front piece. And obviously cutting the back to length is relatively easy. I can just take that dimensioning directly from my front piece. Now I do, however, want to make sure I've got a good edge. This edge, I think from memory, was cut on the table saw, but I can't be sure of that. So I'm just going to smooth this edge down with a hand plane, purely for speed and simplicity, and then we'll use that as our reference edge. I'm going to come in with a slightly different plane this time. This is a number 5 low angled plane, also known as a jack plane. It doesn't have to be the low angled plane, it's just purely the one I've got to hand. And again, it's got a sharp blade in this and it's all set up. The reason I want to use this one is a longer length. If you compare the number 5 with the number 4, you can see there's a big difference in the overall length of the plane. Now, because I'm trying to make a reference edge, I just want that longer sole on the plane to reference to this one. You could use the number 4, but number 5 will give me a truer edge. So we'll just mark that so we know we've got a reference edge. And because I've just checked, I know that that reference edge is square to that face. So I've now got a reference face and a reference edge. What I want to do is to give myself a reference end, and I'll do that on the capex. And all things being equal, that should give me a nice square end there. And it has, so I now know that that edge there is square to my reference edges. Excellent stuff. I can now use that to come in. I can reference one face against this edge, line up the ends to that reference cut we've just made, like so, and bring in my square to the end of that piece of wood. And then I have the length. I can now go back to the capex, use the same reference edge and square that end off. And then just check yourself, and if your work's been good, that should align perfectly, and it does. I just want to start to mark this. I've called this piece B2, so I'm going to put on here B2 back, just so I know and I can keep track of it. Now, the reason I want to start to mark these up is every drawer is made individually to fit its designated hole. So these drawers, although the size is probably the same, they may not be interchangeable. And I've not measured any of this apart from that first measurement to give me the overall height. Everything else has been taken directly from the table as we've cut the stock up. So I just want to make sure that these stay together as sets. And I want to bring these down to length, the side pieces. Now, the overall width of the table from front to back is 5, 6, 8 millimeters. Just try this one as well. 5, 6, 8 millimeters. 5, 6, 8 millimeters. Now, I don't want the back of the drawers hitting each other, so I therefore don't want to make this half of 5, 6, 8. Now, I'm going to put a stop at the back of the drawer, just no harder than putting a stop inside the drawer unit. So if we were to make that stop 28 millimeters wide, then 28 minus the 5/6 would give me 540. So if I made these half of 540, i.e. 270, that will be a good length and allow me to have a stop inside. So we'll make these 270 long. And now we can see the dimensions of the drawer coming together. Obviously these will be in by the thickness of the material when it's dovetailed, but you can start to see what we're up against. Now the final job is just to bring these down to the right width, and again that's set from my front piece. As to line those reference edges at the front there, making a mark. What I'm going to do over on the table saw is to cut this out now slightly too wide, and then I'm going to use the hand plane to bring it down to its final thickness, and that's just going to give me more control and also give me a nice edge. So I'll set the table saw up and I'll rip it to somewhere about there. So I'm going to rip this down to about 117, and therefore that'll give me a couple of millimeters I need to just plane off with the hand plane, and that's not too tricky at all. So 117 is the measurement. And with that done, we can just bring these down using the hand plane. And there we have it, all the parts are sized. They're ready for the joinery. So I'm going to use exactly the same technique to get all the material together for the other 3 drawers. And next time we're together, we'll do the dovetails. I'll see you then.